In this video, I rank 30 iconic villains from animated shows, movies, and series. We got a pretty cool lineup of villains, and without further ado, let's get into the ranking. Alright, so we got some villains here today. Gonna be ranking a couple of iconic villains from, like, animated shows, TVs, movies, whatever, on a little tier list here today. And I think we got some pretty good picks. Some you may recognize, some you may not, but I'm pretty sure most of you recognize these faces. So up first, we got Hades from the classic Disney movie Hercules. I think we can all agree that Hades is a pretty iconic villain. He's got some pretty funny moments.
Isn't Meg looking for you? Isn't
that and Hades' design is also just, like, impossible to forget. The flaming hair that goes crazy when he gets angry.
is waltzing around in the world?
And compared to the other gods of Olympus, who are just all shining and glowing and powerful looking, he's this gloomy, gray, like, gray-blue skin guy because he doesn't get sunlight, because he's constantly in the underworld. Just a really iconic villain all around, and I think Hades is a solid A tier. Okay, next up we got Captain Hook. I mean, the man's pretty unforgettable. He's a goofy, but also, like, intimidating pirate captain. He's got a very, like, regal and, like, commanding attire. He's got the hair, he's got the hook, of course. Captain Hook, who can forget it? And he's, I think what's so great about him as a villain is that he has fear. He is something that he genuinely fears, aka the crocodile that took his hand and has a clock ticking in its stomach. Anytime he hears that ticking, that tick, tick, tick. So I think Captain Hook being a very, like, prominent pirate character, pretty much, like, helping define what a pirate is in movies and media, I'd say he's an also very solid A tier. But I don't think he's as high as Hades. I think Hades is just more iconic and more, like, enjoyable to watch on screen, but still an excellent villain. Next up, we got Cruella de Vil from 101 Dalmatians. This was one of my personal favorite childhood movies. I'm surprised that I'm not a dog person since I grew up on this movie. I'm actually more of a cats person. But Cruella de Vil, you know, she's got the fashion, she's got that sort of middle-aged, I'm rich and I have all the power now, I did my hard labor and now it's time for you to do what I say. She's got that whole thing going on. But honestly, as an actual, like, villain, so to speak, I think she actually ranks a little bit lower than the two we've done so far. She's still an excellent part of the movie and, like, a pretty unforgettable face, but I think she's, like, a high B. Oh, this next one, we got a good one for the next one. Ursula from The Little Mermaid. She was definitely one of the more unforgettable villains, especially her death scene where she gets impaled by that boat. Like, Disney used to not care about being too dark and, you know, having villains meet unfavorable fates. And, you know, she's intelligent, she had a pretty good plan, and overall I think she's a pretty solid villain. I'm gonna put her above Captain Hook in A tier. We got a pretty interesting one for this next one. We got Titan, spelled T-I-G-H-T-E-N, from Megamind. Obviously, Megamind, one of the best movies of all time. There's no questioning that. But Titan's a pretty good villain. You know, Megamind did the whole thing where he pretty much just juiced him up on steroids, and before that he was just a little cameraman filming his little news, you know. But, you know, he was a pretty cool character because, like, he knew what he was, he accepted it, and when he was given just a little taste of power, he was like, yeah, I have the power now, so I'm gonna be what I think is a hero. And, yeah, he went a little bit too far. He's a bit of an extremist. I'd say he's a solid A tier villain, like low A, I'm gonna say. Low A or high B, but I'm gonna put him in low A. Oh boy, this next one hits pretty close to home for a lot of us, I think. We got Scar, of course, from The Lion King. I mean, who can forget Scar? And no, we're not talking about the Scar from the live-action remake. But Scar, you know, he's cunning, he's terrifying, he had a whole plan, he brought absolute ruin to the Pride Lands, and he did not care about it. He pretty much turned the whole place into a wasteland, and, you know, he's got the scar, the iconic scar across his face, and of course that iconic scene where he pushes Mufasa off the side of the cliff.
Long live the king.
Overall, Scar, probably one of the best villains of all time in terms of Disney animation, and I'd say he's probably our first S tier. Next up, we got Maleficent from Sleeping Beauty. I think Maleficent's definitely, like, one of the more beloved villains. She's got the black cloak, the horns, the crow. I love the damn crow. She commanded respect, she was intelligent, she knew exactly what she was doing, she had goals, and she knew how she was gonna get them. I'd say she's probably A tier. I'd say honestly right above Ursula. I think above Ursula makes sense since Maleficent got that whole play about her made a couple years back. But yeah, Maleficent, I'd say pretty high A tier villain. Next up we got Shan Yu from Mulan, the original Mulan, not the live action remake. That remake was terrible. Shan Yu's a warlord, he's a conqueror, he's terrifying, he's got like really scary eyes, and I think intimidation is one of his strongest qualities as a villain. Leader of the Huns, an absolute excellent villain, but I think in comparison to some of these other ones, I'm actually going to put him I'm going to put him at high B. I'd say he fits low or mid A just as well, but I'm going to put him at high B for my list. Next up we got Slade or Deathstroke from Teen Titans, the original Teen Titans. Not Teen Titans Go, aka Cartoon Network's current cash cow. Great antagonist, he's got an awesome design, he's terrifying, he's scary, he's powerful. Overall, pretty solid villain. I'm gonna put him at mid B tier for now. Oh, this one's special. This one I wasn't sure if I was gonna include or not, but I did it anyway. We got Fire Lord Ozai from the beloved show Avatar: The Last Airbender. An absolutely phenomenal show that, if you haven't seen it, go and watch it, bro. Fire Lord Ozai sort of turned into the epitome and like the spitting image of why the world hated the Fire Nation. He's powerful, he's crazy, he's unhinged, and he really doesn't have any humanity sort of in him. Especially after that scene where Zuko was re-invited to the like council meeting, and he said that bit about destroying the Earth Kingdom's hope.
We need to destroy their hope.
Overall, excellent villain. I'd say he's probably, honestly, I was going to put him in S tier, but I'm going to say he's high A. I'm going to put him right above Captain Hook. Next up, we got an all-time classic, Skeletor.
What?
One of He-Man's greatest nemesises, and definitely his most iconic, without a doubt in my mind. He's funny, he's got a quirky voice.
Bungus!
Not to mention all the memes that have come out of Skeletor. I mean, the dude is everywhere in meme media. Overall, pretty great and iconic villain. I'm going to be putting him in the low A category. I'd say he fits high B as well, but I'll put him in low A. Next up, we got another classic, Gaston from Beauty and the Beast. He's charismatic, he's handsome, he's the opposite of that, like, typical, like, hero, charming, like, type deal. He is charming, but he's not the typical, like, he's not a hero, but he uses all of his charming qualities and charismatic nature to his advantage, and he's a pretty solid villain. I'm gonna put him in like mid to low A, I'd say. Now next we got a pretty interesting pick. We got Dennis from the SpongeBob movie, the original SpongeBob movie, the only SpongeBob movie. It's the only one, and you can't tell me otherwise. Dennis was this sort of like bounty hunter type guy who Plankton hired to sort of like hunt down SpongeBob and Patrick and make sure that they didn't become a problem in his whole Plan Z scheme. Overall, he's a pretty like typical antagonist. He's got the whole bandana and the cowboy hat and the knife around his neck. He's a pretty like edgy type villain. But he's pretty one-dimensional, definitely extremely memorable, but since he's kind of one-dimensional, I'm actually going to put him down in C tier, our first C tier. Next up, we got Jafar from Aladdin. I'd say he's pretty up there with like memorable Disney villains, very mustache twirling, he's got the goatee going on, very, very excellent epitome of a mustache twirling villain. He's very like, he's like scheming and like, oh yeah, I'm going to get what I want. But yeah, overall, pretty solid villain. I'm going to put him, again, I'm going to say mid A tier, right next to Gaston. Now, next one, this one's a little bit more personal, as this one's from a show I grew up with. Chris McLean from Total Drama Action. Who remembers that show? But yeah, Chris McLean was a pretty interesting take on a villain. His whole deal is like, he's not necessarily evil, he's just like mentally insane. I mean, the dude ends up in jail one season, I'm pretty sure. I didn't really watch after season 2, but he's sort of that stereotypical actually mentally crazy villains, and I think that's a pretty cool concept. I'm gonna putting him in low B. Next up, we got another classic, I'd say. Well, not as classic as some of the other ones, but a classic for like early 2000s, early 2010s type kids. We got Mojo Jojo from the Powerpuff Girls. Man, I haven't talked about this show in a while. You know, he's this crazy monkey who hides his massive brain under a thing, and he's just all around just evil, just trying to thwart the Powerpuff Girls at every turn. He kind of gives me like semi-similar vibes to Bling Bling from Johnny Test, another pretty weird early 2000s show. I'd say he's honestly, I'm gonna put him in C tier above Dennis. Not necessarily a bad villain, I just don't think he's like super like great or memorable, but definitely iconic. This next one's one of my personal favorites, so I might be a bit biased. We got Aku from Samurai Jack. He's definitely another villain who's prominent in meme culture. A foolish samurai warrior, wielding a shape-shifting master of darkness, wielding a magic sword.
Wielding a magic sword, wielding a foolish samurai warrior, wielding a magic sword, wielding an unspeakable evil.
But yeah, Aku, very memorable. Him ordering pizza, I think it was probably one of my favorite moments with him. I also picked that as the photo for this tier list. Overall, I think Aku is a very like funny villain, very enjoyable to watch when he comes on screen. I'm gonna put him at high B, right behind Deathstroke. Oh, this next one's gonna be inarguable with the ratings. We got Bill Cipher, of course. How could I do an animated villains tier list without including Bill Cipher? Dude's maniacal, he's crazy, he's from another dimension, he is way too powerful for his own good, and his voice actor is actually insane.
Whoa. Pain is hilarious!
And I think Bill Cipher as Gravity Falls, like, final boss, so to speak, was an excellent choice. The whole Weird Mageddon quadrilogy was just amazing. And the fact that one tiny, fatal little mistake is the reason he lost, I think is what makes him such a great villain. Even the most powerful and cunning of villains make mistakes, and sometimes it can cost them everything. So I'm going to put him as our next S tier, right behind Scar. And speaking of Bill Cipher's voice actor, we got a villain from the show that he did recently. We got Emperor Belos from the Owl House. Belos is definitely a, like, extremely deep villain in the sense that, like, his whole history and, like, the way he went about his goals was very interesting. I'm not going to give too many spoilers here, because, like, the Owl House is a great show and you should all go watch it. I think what makes Emperor Belos such a great villain is that he thinks he's doing the right thing. He is 100% confident that what he is doing is for the betterment of the world, and he believes that up until his dying breath. And I think a lot of villains sort of miss that note nowadays, where they try to be like, oh, I didn't mean it, or like, oh, I thought it was best, you know? And the fact that he got proven wrong, even when he still believed what he was doing was right, was what made him such a great villain. So I'm actually going to make him an S tier. Next up, we got another classic, Syndrome from The Incredibles. Syndrome was definitely one of my favorite villains growing up. The Incredibles was just such a good movie. I would watch it, like, unhealthy amounts of times. Syndrome is a great and compelling villain because he's someone you can sort of sympathize with and understand why he's doing what he's doing. He wanted to be a superhero. He wanted to be just like his icon, Mr. Incredible. But he didn't have any powers. So he took it upon himself to use his resources and his intellect to make technology that would give him the abilities of his superhero. Dude invented 0-point energy. Like, where else have we seen that? Not to mention, he put into perspective that not all superheroes need to have capes, especially with his death. I think his death sort of marked the beginning of superheroes not necessarily needing to have capes. I love, honestly, The Incredibles, all-around great movie, and Syndrome is one of the best villains on this list. So I'm going to put him at high A. I'm going to say just above Firelord Ozai. Next up, we got someone who isn't necessarily a villain, but is technically an antagonistic force. Dr. Doofenshmirtz from Perry the Platypus. Who remembers that show? I remember back when I was young, they would run the movie, the Perry the Platypus movie, where the kids found out about who he was, and there was that, like, whole alternate dimension thing. They'd rerun that, like, on the same day every year, and that was something I looked forward to each year. But Dr. Doofenshmirtz, he's a goofy villain, you know, he's always making some new innator.
Behold the Destructinator!
You know, he's always trying to thwart Perry the Platypus with his devices, but there's always some fatal flaw or something he just completely forgot about, or just backfires on him entirely. And he's just a great, like, really likable character. he does technically fit the villain category, but he's not necessarily a bad guy, you know, and I think that's why he was so likable. So I'm gonna put him at high B, right above Deathstroke. I was trying not to include any villains from anime, but I couldn't just help but throw this one in. Dio Brando from JoJo's Bizarre Adventure. It's really hard to do any video and not throw in a JoJo reference somewhere. But yeah, Dio Brando, pretty much the catalyst for all the events that happened throughout the multiple seasons of the show. He's, I think his charisma, I think him being so charismatic that he can just will people to do what he wants is a very, like, interesting character trait. Like, sure, a lot of the villains on this list are extremely charismatic, but the fact that just his words and his tone of voice can sort of coerce people into doing his bidding or just being completely hypnotized, I think that's one of his more interesting quote-unquote abilities. Obviously he gets to stand the world, he's a vampire, he's immortal and all that, but I think his charisma is what really makes him a more interesting villain. So I'm gonna put him in A tier, I'm gonna say right behind Gaston, right here. Next villain we got is also from an anime. I didn't want to do too many villains from anime because I was sort of focusing on animation, like cartoons and stuff. Animation, like cartoons and stuff. But I couldn't help but throw these two in here. We got Frieza from Dragon Ball Z. I think a lot of us, or at least a fair few of us, grew up watching Dragon Ball Z. Frieza was always sort of like the big bad, Goku's hardest challenge, and of course the iconic Goku versus Frieza fight that dragged on for how many hours was it? I don't even remember. But yeah, Frieza, powerful, always trying to become more powerful. Overall, like, excellent anime villain in my opinion. Also, awesome design. I think that's one of Frieza's strongest points is Frieza's design. And I'm gonna say Frieza's probably... I'm gonna say Frieza's definitely an A tier villain. I'll put Frieza right behind Ozai. I think that's good. I also tried to be as diverse as possible with this list, but I couldn't help but throw this one in here. We got Azula, also from Avatar: The Last Airbender, and I think she's definitely a more interesting villain than Ozai, for sure. Her introduction in Season 2 was, like, very, very well. She's, like, extremely, like, calm and collected in her demeanor. She knows how to clap back whenever Zuko or Iroh give her some shit. And her slow descent from, like, relative sanity in Season 2 to completely insane in the end of Book 3 was, like, excellent. You could sort of slowly see her mental state just decline and her just go nuts with power and, like, banish everyone from the kingdom because she just doesn't want anyone to oppose her, not even common citizens. And her design and, like, demeanor are just incredible. Her abilities are terrifying, especially the blue fire. Who can forget her blue fire? I think that's one of the most memorable parts of her character. But yeah, overall, Azula, definitely an extremely interesting and in-depth villain. I think my personal favorite part of her character was her struggle to sort of accept that her mother never saw her as a monster, just, like, always believing that her mother hated her. I'd say she's actually probably a better villain than Ozai. Ozai's an excellent villain, but Azula is just a little bit more interesting. She has more depth, and her slow decline into insanity after eventually getting everything she wants is very, very interesting and cool to watch. Next up, we got a more recent villain from animated media, Omni-Man from Invincible. We got the Season 2 of Invincible coming up sometime this year. I think the trailer said, like, late 2023.
The world will get more Invincible in late 2023.
And Omni-Man, like, definitely one of the most impressive twist villains of recent memory. And his sort of slow descent into realizing, like, oh, geez, I really gotta do this. I really gotta do this. I gotta be who I gotta be. And then see that tiny spark of humanity come out of him right when he's trying to kill his own son, and he just can't go through with it. I think that makes him an excellent villain. And, you know, he also gave us that scene of, Think, Mark!
Think, Mark! Aye!
And I think I'm going to be putting Omni-Man in S tier. Next up, we got another Disney villain, Otto from WALL-E. Otto is, like, this sort of robotic, quote-unquote, assistant to the captain of the Axiom, but in reality, he's been the one running the show since humanity's basically become useless. And you know, for like a villain, I say villain with quotes because like he is a machine, he is following protocol, like he has no real malicious intent, he's just doing what he was programmed to do. I'd say that kind of makes him, like a high C-tier villain. I'd say definitely higher than Dennis and Mojo Jojo. I think he's also more than eligible for B-tier, but I'm gonna put him in C-tier. Alright, this next one's definitely one of my absolute favorites. We got the Lich from Adventure Time. The Lich is really how you do a one-dimensional villain the right way. He's the literal embodiment of all things evil and vile and malicious, and, you know, he just is he's the epitome of a Dark Lord, pretty much. The fact that the detonation of a nuclear bomb, aka the Mushroom Bomb, ushered in his corporeal form to the physical world just goes to show just how hell-bent he is on destroying all life across the multiverse. I think the Lich's most, like, memorable, villainous moment, I guess you could say, is when Finn found out that the Lich was possessing Billy's body the entire time and Billy was long dead. Like, that's how you really traumatize a kid, by possessing their childhood idol's body and using it for their own devices. And I think that was definitely one of the Lich's best moments as a villain. So I'm going to be putting the Lich very high A. I'm actually going to put him above Ursula, right next to Maleficent, because he's just such a great villain, and he's a one-dimensional villain done in the right way. Like, no punches are pulled with his writing, no punches are pulled with his actions. He is what he is, and that is an evil bastard. Down to the final three, and three of my absolute favorites. Of course, I had to include this one. We got Wolf, or Death, from Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. It goes without saying that Death is one of the greatest villains to come out in recent memory. He's terrifying, he's got cool weapons, his design is not more than it needs to be, it just is what it should be, which is a dark, menacing cloak that covers most of his body, but lets his red eyes peer out from underneath whenever he wants to intimidate Puss in Boots. His appearances, whenever he shows up, he does his little whistling tune. That's how you really strike fear into someone's heart, and I think that's another reason he was so beloved. And his motivations are also, like, very good, as Death straight up, as he puts it.
I'm Death, straight up.
He finds the idea of 9 lives absurd, and seeing Puss in Boots waste his 8 lives just completely ignorantly kind of pisses him off, and honestly, he's kind of in the right. So he goes to a bit of an extreme and decides, hey, you know, you're probably just going to waste this last life, so I'm just going to take it before I have to watch you waste it. But yeah, Death from Puss in Boots, definitely an amazing villain. I'm probably going to be putting him, I'm going to be putting him in S tier, probably above Omni-Man. Omni-Man's still an excellent villain, but Death is just like, ooh, that's how you do a terrifying villain right. 2 to go. Next up, we got Kingpin, specifically Kingpin from Spider-Man Into the Spider-Verse. Kingpin is definitely a classic Spider-Man villain, and he hasn't lost any of that in Spider-Verse. Spider-Verse in general is a great movie. You know, he's not necessarily evil, he is like a very angry individual, and he does like have a hatred for Spider-Man because he blames Spider-Man for the death of his family, so he goes to the extreme to try and bring his family back. And I think that sort of human side of him that, like, yeah, he's done a lot of bad things, but all he really wants is to get his family back, and, you know, he just sort of becomes consumed by obsession, and I think obsession is a great trait to give to villains. So yeah, Kingpin, overall, excellent villain. I'm gonna put him probably above Frieza, right there. Yeah, that looks good. And we're down to our last villain, the Nowhere King from Centaur World. The Nowhere King definitely gives me sort of vibes similar to that of, like, Death, Belos, and probably the Lich. He's like a sort of he gives me vibes from them, all sort of different vibes similar to them, but he's an extremely interesting, and his character's design is just great. Now, I've never actually watched Centaur World. I've heard mixed things about it. I heard the first season was good, and then the second season was kind of like, you know what I'm saying? I only found out about the Nowhere King because I saw this video on YouTube sort of breaking down what he really is, like literally and metaphorically. And that's when I was sort of like, wait a minute, what even is this show? His skull and his massive like antlers are like an amazing design, and I think in terms of like looking terrifying, having a terrifying voice, and just like not caring about just anyone is what makes him such a great villain. You could say he's one-dimensional, but he is like one half of a whole. Not to mention that one of the songs I really did like from Centaur World was the lullaby about the Nowhere King, and I think creepy music to go along with villains, kind of similar to Death's little whistle he does. I think ominous music like that is I feel like it's a big missed opportunity with a lot of villains, and that's something I really liked about the Nowhere King. So yeah, I think Nowhere King is like I'd say he's like an A-tier villain. He does have an interesting backstory, but I don't think it holds too much of a candle to the other ones. I'd say he's, I'm gonna put him right above Skeletor. That feels good. I know a lot of the villains in this tier list, I didn't really give any like D or Fs, but like it's an iconic villains tier list. Like none of these villains are necessarily bad, you know, like they're all like very memorable, all very interesting. And you know, I think if any of you are unfamiliar with any of these villains, you should check out the media they're from. They're all like excellent movies and shows and stuff, and I think you could watch any one of these shows or movies and have a great time with it. So that's my final ranking for these 30 iconic animated villains. If anyone wants to do their own ranking, I'll leave a link to the tier list in the description below. And with that, I hope you all enjoyed the video. See you soon.